love. Now, I know many of you saying, what do you mean by love? Because people have so many different understandings of love. What I am talking about is not the powerless, the weak, and the anemic love. No, no, no. I'm talking about be love and implement the demands of justice. Be love and use your power to correct everything that stands against love. The urgency of now is to dig in and create the beloved community by rising up to be love. Let's go forward in this moment and bridge the divides. Let's go forward to create the beloved community. Let's go forward and rise up to be love.
The nonviolent movement for social change must be properly interpreted, as well as developing programs that will deal with the issues of today.
Dear Coretta.
Dear Coretta.
Dear phenomenal woman.
Dear mother, I can still hear your voice lifted in song. I can still see the warmth in your eyes and feel the gentle wisdom of your words.
You had a vision of the future that felt impossible to so many. But your faith, fortitude, and integrity laid the groundwork for it to become a reality.
Thank you, Mrs. Coretta.
For creating, for singing, for leading, for being.
Heal the wounded soul. There is a Lord.
You didn't just teach it, you lived it. You told your own story in your own words. When others spoke over you, you let your actions be a guide for those who chose to see.
You are glorious, not because you are perfect, but because life's imperfections taught you grace. Sharpen your compassion and your passions.
At this point, I feel even stronger, and I want you to know that you have my utmost support.
You stared down hate, stood firm in your beliefs,
Protected the small, prepared a place for those who were oppressed. You showed us that resistance is a discipline, integrity is a practice in empathy, and courage can be cultivated by each and every one of us.
When people decide to be free and they are united together in that effort, nothing can stop them.
You weathered storms, rebuilt from charred embers, conquered fear, and laughed a lot.
you told us that we could be anything and that our circumstances didn't define our greatness. Most of all, you taught us that our dreams matter. Dear Coretta.
Dear Coretta.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Students with King serves as the King Center's flagship engagement platform for elementary, middle, and high school students, highlighting the legacies of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and the impact of the 20th century American Civil Rights Movement. Our dynamic and interactive programming has reached over 1 million students worldwide. Our core learning programs introduce students to the philosophy of Kingian Nonviolence, coined Nonviolence 365, and provide important lessons about how they can apply nonviolence in their immediate environments. Whether you're an educator who is looking for ways to bring the King legacy into your classroom, a student who wants to learn more about this powerful moral movement, or a parent who wants to get your child involved in character building and literacy development activities, Students with King is your one-stop shop for unique lesson plans, teaching resources, educational field trips, and other opportunities to engage with the history of the American Civil Rights Movement and its powerful leaders. We look forward to engaging with you and your students. Together we can build the next generation of compassionate, courageous, and conscientious leaders.
And we are live here in Atlanta with Students with King. Thanks everybody for being with us. Excited that people are with us from all over the country and far beyond thanks to technology. So as we kick things off, I want you to roll call for me. Type in, let us know where you're joining us from, whether it's New York, other states. If you're in your classroom, we'd love you to shout out your location so we can all meet each other a little bit here as we kick off today's Students with King. Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl Preheim. I am a journalist and a news anchor with NBC News out of Atlanta with WXIA. Been involved with the King Center for almost a decade now, and it is always a privilege to be associated with any of the things that they do. Appreciate that they are such a treasure, not only here in the city of Atlanta, but all across the country and around the world. And so happy that you are a part of it too. So be sure to shout out where you're joining us from. I can read off some of those things as they pop up on the bottom of the screen. And just a little heads up as we get going today, have your questions ready. We really want to hear from you. We want to make sure that you're engaged and we answer all the questions you have as we learn today about Mrs. Coretta Scott King, her vision for the King Center, her continued work, and really the inspiration she was, the legacy that she leaves us all today. So shout out where you're coming from. We'll read those off in just a bit, but I want to start with a video with an introduction to our fantastic guest today. We are so fortunate to be with Dr. Kelisha Graves. She is the Chief Research Education Programs Officer with the King Center, and we want to introduce her to you now.
Welcome to our Students with King Nonviolence Spotlight Series. I'm Kelisha Graves, but my students call me Professor Graves. I'm a teacher, and I really enjoy helping students learn more about the life and impact of Mrs. Coretta Scott King. Coretta Scott King is commonly known as the wife and widow of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But what I want you to know is that she was a woman of substance and commitment. Yes, that's right. Mrs. King was a leader and a world changer in her own right. Mrs. King was a leader, a wife, and a mother. She fought for freedom, and she inspired Dr. King to fight for freedom. And because of her, we have the Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolent Social Change. She was also the driving force behind the National King Holiday, which is celebrated every third Monday in January. Yes, you guessed it, Mrs. King was awesome. Coretta Scott was born on April 27, 1927, in Heiberger, Alabama, to Obadiah Scott and Bernice McMurray Scott. As a young person, she attended the Lincoln High School. Later, she attended Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, where she majored in music and elementary education. After leaving Antioch College, she attended the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston, Massachusetts, where she majored in voice and violin. While studying at the New England Conservatory of Music, she met Martin Luther King Jr. Mrs. King and Dr. King had a common interest in social justice and activism. Together, they committed their lives to bring about peace and justice through nonviolent social change.
The world is in dire need of a spiritual awakening which will make those eternal values of love, justice, mercy, and peace meaningful in our time.
Mrs. King was not only important to the civil rights movement, of which she and her husband were central leaders, but she was also a leader in the global fight for social justice.
Thank you so much, Dr. Graves, for being with us today. And just thanks in advance for all of the wisdom and knowledge that you'll share with us. So as we introduce you here to our students who are joining us from all over, maybe just start with your connection there to the King Center.
Sure. So I've been involved. Well, it's better framed as this. I've been involved with the King legacy for, the last 15, 20 years of my life. I was introduced to the King legacy when I was about 15 years old, and I was primarily inspired by Mrs. King's life and legacy. As young people in school, we always hear about Martin Luther King Jr. We rarely hear about Mrs. King. You hear about Mrs. King in terms of being his wife, but not anything in depth. And so I remember it was in early 2006 during King holiday. My father had me watch this program on NPR called Democracy Now!, which I still watch today. And they were showing clips of the civil rights movement, and they kept showing clips of the Selma to Montgomery March. And I remember seeing Mrs. King in each of those frames. And I was like, this is so interesting. If Mrs. King was there and if she was present, why didn't I know about it? And so I always say, good research starts with a good question. And so my question was, who is Coretta Scott King? What did she do with her life? What was her contribution to the civil rights movement? Started doing research. And at that time, there were only children's books. And so I checked out all of the books that I could. Mrs. King's autobiography, the first one she wrote in 69, that was published in 69. Was available, and that really started my journey. And shortly thereafter, I wrote a letter to Dr. King's oldest daughter, Miss Yolanda King, and I said, my name is Kelisha Graves. I'm a 15-year-old young person. I've been inspired by your mother's life, and all I want for my sweet 16, right, is to come to the King Center. I didn't want a birthday party or any of that, but I was always like that as a young person. My birthday gifts were like going to museums and libraries and things like that. So, but I was very intentional about it. And she got the letter. I put my phone number at the bottom of the letter, and like, who does that? I said, sincerely, Kelisha, 910, and put put my number, and her office called. And that really started this kind of long multi-year journey with the King legacy and certainly the King Center.
I think that is the perfect story to really embody what those involved with the King Center have done to take one interaction at a time to really spread the love that we talk about. I love in that opening video where it says, correct anything that stands against love. I love that. And really just to see that as a 15-year-old, this is someone who wanted to invest in knowledge. And then today, here you are still sharing that knowledge. And as you said, every good piece of research starts with a question. So as people have questions, make sure they type them in as well. Amazing to kind of think back, I guess, because like you said, there was so much written about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You hadn't seen much about Mrs. King, but it was Mrs. King that was such a pivotal part of continuing the legacy. It was her vision to start the King Center. Talk a little bit about first, maybe let's start now and work our way back about what resources are available to all of us today because of the vision that she had, even at a devastating time in her life after his assassination.
Absolutely. So the King Center, just to kind of frame it up, is the official living memorial and programmatic nonprofit dedicated to advancing Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy and work around the world. And Mrs. King really was the engine that allowed and enabled that to happen. It's remarkable. Mrs. King is, in her early 40s when Dr. King is assassinated in 68. And for a woman at that time to literally commit herself to building an institution is something that is absolutely remarkable. At the King Center, we affectionately call Mrs. King the architect of the King legacy. So she's not just someone who is a visionary, but she literally applies energy and is deeply invested in ensuring that the King Center had a programmatic focus as well. I think it's important for people to realize and to remember that Mrs. King was an educator. When she was at Antioch College, she was focused on elementary education. And so that kind of dedication and emphasis on education reaching young people, ensuring that we have programs. But not only that, education is the way that you can, in business, the word is scale, that you can scale heart and mind change. And she understood that that really needed to be a core focus of the work of the institution that she founded. So Mrs. King, both a visionary, but also an architect. When you think about the design of the King Center, the very design of the buildings themselves, everything was very intentional in terms of how she saw the work of the King Center. So Mrs. King, absolutely extraordinary. And I think it's also important as an African American woman, the fact that she's able to do this, right, in the late 60s is remarkable. But also, when you look at kind of the broader landscape of African American history, Mrs. King is in a tradition of women who found and who start institutions. You have women like Nannie Helen Burroughs, who founds a school for girls in New York. You have Charlotte, I'm sorry, in DC. You have Charlotte Hawkins Brown, who founds a school for young women in North Carolina. You have Mary Church Terrell, Anna Julia Cooper, all of these women who are invested in building and creating institutions that can serve young people and serve the community. So Mrs. King's work is unique, certainly for a woman in the late 60s. But when you look at the broad kind of landscape of African American endeavor in this country in terms of institution building, Mrs. King is certainly well situated in a long tradition.
Yeah, and to think about her doing that while raising 4 kids at a time where she was having to help raise the money to make these dreams a reality, and we're all benefiting from that today. A way to preserve that history and that experience to move the cause forward even today. Talk to me a little bit about those moments in time that stand out most to you as we think about, I think a lot of people recognize the extreme courage from Dr. King, but to think about Mrs. Coretta Scott King, I think about that as a mom, the times that they were targeted as a family, where their lives were at risk, where they had to make a conscious decision day in, day out to continue their work for a greater good.
Absolutely. I think what's also important for people to remember is how young Dr. King and Mrs. King were when they were kind of thrust to the forefront of what was in the Montgomery bus boycott. But they're in their mid to late 20s. And, you know, to be in a situation where one's life is threatened, that demands something different of you. So when Dr. King and Mrs. King are students, certainly Dr. King studied, Martin Luther King Jr. studied nonviolence, and Mrs. King was introduced to nonviolence early in her kind of intellectual journey as well. And so as students, they're aware of these ideas, but it's not until Montgomery, when the house is bombed and when their lives are threatened, that they really have to make, there's a big word called existential, where they really have to put a real commitment to the ideas that they've engaged with as you know, young learners in college. And so, I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary when you think about the kind of life commitment. And for them, and certainly this is what we teach at the King Center, that nonviolence is not just a tactic or something you pick up and put down, but it really is a way of life. And so at the King Center, it's been branded by our CEO as Nonviolence 365 to represent that this is something that should be carried throughout one's life, that it should influence every avenue of your life endeavor, how you deal with people, how you conduct yourself in a school setting, how you interact with friends. The King Center, we say that nonviolence is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, acting, and engaging that leads to personal, societal, and cultural transformation. And so I would say certainly Montgomery, when you look at Mrs. King's life, is a remarkable moment. But I also think the way in which Mrs. King was able to use the arts to spread a message was also incredibly powerful. She, during the movement, she produced and performed what were called freedom concerts, which told the story of the civil rights movement around the country. And that was also a pivotal kind of and an essential fundraising arm for the civil rights movement as well. But Mrs. King uses the arts, and she uses song, and she uses narrative and performance in order to communicate, a valuable story about the struggle of a people. And so, but again, this is connected to Mrs. King's kind of life's work and passion for education. And it's interesting when you look at her life's work, how she's able to find these creative avenues to still communicate and educate the masses. I also think another unique aspect of Mrs. King in terms of her leadership is how she was able to be a coalition builder. She was able to reach people from all walks of life. When you read her book, she talks about this concept or term. She calls it the ministry of presence, in terms of being present with people. Mrs. King was a very strong coalition builder. I mean, she wouldn't have been able to accomplish the King holiday had she not been a very deep, or had she not had, let me say it this way, a very deep and wide focus on what it meant to build coalitions with people, not only around the country in terms of the US, but also certainly around the world, and how you galvanize people around a vision. Mrs. King was an exceptionally, I would say, gifted at being able to galvanize people around a common core vision. So anyway, I'll pause there.
That's so good. I was just thinking about, Dr. Graves, as you were talking, that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Mrs. King would often talk about the Sunday supper and how they really felt strongly about one conversation at a time. You can start to bridge a divide, and how they would invite people to have supper together, people who maybe had different perspectives, but how they could come together over a meal and bridge those divides, and something that they did together. And I know that that's a tradition that continues here to celebrate the Dr. King holiday every year. You mentioned the CEO of the King Center, and for anyone who's on the call and isn't aware, Dr. Bernice King is the CEO, and she is, of course, the daughter of Mrs. Coretta Scott King. And I thought about how she's really carrying on her mother's legacy in the work that she's doing, to your point, that it is a way of life. And I've heard her talk about how the nonviolence principles are so applicable to all of our lives, whether you're in a high school classroom or a hallway, or you're meeting someone on the street, or you have a confrontation at a gas station, whatever it might be, that these are teachings and a way of life that we can all consider and have part of our daily lives now as well. How much would it mean, do you think, to Mrs. King to know that this conversation and that practice continues?
Absolutely. I think Mrs. King would be quite pleased to see the continued work of the King Center. I mean, this was her kind of long range, overarching vision, to see the King Center be able to impact people's real lives on a daily basis. The way that you get heart and mind change, or at least the way that I see it, is by impacting people, impacting individuals. When you impact individuals, those individuals go, and then they're able to have impact on others. And so I think Mrs. King would be quite pleased with the continued work of the King Center in terms of achieving heart and mind and social change by impacting individuals. But also, I think she'd be pleased to see the King Center still moving full speed ahead with advocating and educating the masses on nonviolence. If you think about nonviolence training, the King Center really is and was a trailblazer in terms of offering nonviolence training to the masses. Of course, nonviolence, when you think about it within the context of the civil rights movement, this is a form of engagement that leaders and participants in the movement were trained on. But what Mrs. King is able to do through the work of the King Center is not just leave it there kind of confined to those who are actively engaged in civil rights activism, but also to scale it out, right? To offer it to everybody in the community, to communities around the world who want to understand how they can apply and use the philosophy of nonviolence. And a remarkable thing that was able to be, or that we accomplished under the leadership of our CEO, is that we were actually able to translate kind of our brick and mortar traditional nonviolence training, which was typically traditionally delivered face to face, and we were actually able to adapt that into an online platform entitled Nonviolence 365 Online. There are two formats for this class. There's a masterclass edition, which is about a 16 to 18-hour experience, and then there's the workplace edition, which is about a 3.5-hour experience. So I think Mrs. King would be quite pleased to see the accomplishments that certainly her daughter has been able to share with the world in terms of taking her mother's core vision and then using technology and being able to spread that to people all over the world.
Just a reminder, if anybody has a question, be sure to type it in so that we can pass it off to Dr. Graves and make sure we get your questions answered. Dr. Graves, you talked a little bit about Mrs. King being a very talented musician and brilliant, that she found a way to use music to connect kind of body, mind, and soul, you know, to convey a message and an emotion, to bring people together and also raise money, to do all of those things as the civil rights movement moved forward. But using her voice was a central theme and is always important in her life, her entire life. What message do you have for all of the students joining us today, teachers as well, about the importance of using our voices today, and maybe what we can draw from Mrs. King, what she taught us, and how that inspiration could move us forward today to many challenges that we all face?
Absolutely. I think it's important for young people to understand and know this is something that Mrs. King, we really can glean and learn from Mrs. King's life, is that your voice matters and that your voice is important. And that's something that was demonstrated throughout Mrs. King's life. But the key is you have to use your voice, right? It can't, or it won't make a difference if you don't use it. And so I think if there's anything that we can glean from Mrs. King's life, it's about how do you use your voice to advocate and to speak about the things that are of importance to you. How do you use your voice when you think about in a school setting to speak up for other people? How do you use your voice to communicate with your teachers about what you're learning? So how do you use your voice to communicate to your teachers about the things you'd like to learn and to be exposed to? So I think it's important for young people to understand that your voice does matter, but you have to give volume to it. You have to use it so that other people can hear it. So Mrs. King was able to demonstrate that throughout her life, not only in a kind of verbal sense, but also, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the arts and being able to share with people in that way around the world.
You know, it's interesting, Dr. Graves. I think about how we have all these tools at our fingertips to be able to use our voices in ways that were not accessible during the civil rights movement. You know, they were relying on, you know, newspapers, occasionally a television report, but this was a time of no internet, no laptops, no cell phones, no instant message chats or social media. And now the opportunity to use technology to galvanize or to share your voice in a positive way, in a nonviolent way, is an incredible opportunity if people, one, choose to use it and then use it in those positive ways.
Yeah, absolutely. These tools are here to assist us, not to replace us, if you will, and they're meant to be used for good. So it's very important as young people think about using technology and using social media, that it is used for a positive force. As you mentioned, the medium of their day, when you think about the 50s and 60s, was newspapers and leaflets. When you think about the Montgomery bus boycott, I mean, imagine this. During the Montgomery bus boycott in between 55 and 56, they had to get a message to, 50,000 people in the African American community to not ride the buses. And the way they did that was through leaflets, like pieces of paper that you have to go and literally distribute hand by hand to people or leave on their porches. So technology today enables us to be able to do things much faster. But I think it's also important to understand that we maintain kind of a moral and very intentional approach to how we use these tools in our everyday lives and ensure that we use them for good and to uplift our community as opposed to using them as a form of, of destruction or anything like that.
No doubt requires a tremendous amount of consciousness and responsibility when we have those kinds of tools and access to blast out information, it just with the swipe of a finger. In all the research you did about Mrs. Coretta Scott King, was there something that surprised you the most?
That surprised me the most. That is an interesting question. I would say something that was interesting is how well traveled she was. Mrs. King and Dr. King traveled all over the world. And I think that's also something important for young people to understand when you look at the context broadly of the African American experience, the fact that you have these two young African Americans, Dr. King and Mrs. King, who are able to travel the world and learn from people from different cultures, but not only learn, but to also share as well. I would say that's something that sticks out to me when you look at both Dr. King and Mrs. King.
Now, Dr. Graves, I saw a question flash up and I missed it. So, okay, here we go. As you were sharing about the way that Mrs. King used her voice, I wondered if there was any specific quote from Mrs. King that resonated with you today. This quote coming from Sharita Cunningham.
Yeah. So there was a quote that was actually of particular importance to Mrs. King, and she talks about it. It was a quote actually by Horace Mann, who's the founder of the Common School movement. So if you need something to research Horace Mann and the Common School movement in the U.S. But she particularly liked a quote that said, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." And so what that really means is find something of importance to you that you can commit your life to, and not only live one's life in a very not to live one's life in a selfish way, but to really live one's life with a service mindset, thinking about what is it that I can do for the community? What do I owe my neighbor? And I think that's a critical question that was not only applicable during Mrs. King's time, but it's also applicable for our time today. I think if we all pause and step back and say, what is it that I owe my neighbor, and allow that to guide how we engage, we can certainly see a lot of positive and constructive contributions to our society. But I would say that is the quote top of mind: be ashamed to die until you've won some victory for humanity. And then this is not a quote, but this is something that Mrs. King talks about when I mentioned it earlier, when she talks about the ministry of what she called the ministry of presence, and quite simply what it means to be with people, what it means to support people, even if something doesn't affect you directly, it still affects you indirectly. Dr. King said, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And so Mrs. King was very clear that it was important for her, not only in a leadership sense, but in a very human sense, to be able to show up for people, to support people, to provide pathways and opportunities for people. When you think about how Mrs. King's vision of the King Center and the actual building of the institution is important, but it's also the fact that it provides jobs to the community, right? There are people who continue to work at the center today. When the King Center was being constructed, there are people who have to build the buildings and contribute to the institution in that way. So Mrs. King was very intentional. When you think about the ministry of presence, I think it's important to see it in a kind of broad sense, and how she was able to create opportunities for people in the community and really bring them in. So I'll pause there.
There's so much I'm thinking about when you're talking, because that's such a beautiful phrase, the ministry of presence.
Yeah.
Because I think in a world where there's so many distractions and you're always, kind of maybe not as present, to really think about the power of just being present, just slows me down a little bit. I'm so happy you said that. And Dr. Graves, I've never heard that quote. That's really impactful. Be ashamed to die until you've won some victories for others, because that is about living our lives, not focused on always us and our gain, but how can we help others. And like you said, because if we just live in a silo, we miss the beauty of how interconnected we all are, but then we also miss the opportunity of making sure that we provide ways to be more connected.
Absolutely. And it's so important for young people to have resources that allow them to be able to access those stories. When I think about, I'm an educator, kind of to my very core. And I think it's so important for young people to have access to resources that allow them to see the beauty of the human story in all of its various forms. The civil rights movement is a pivotal moment in the human story. When you think about other movements and moments and people, the story of Harriet Tubman, that is important. That's an important moment in the human story. When you think about the suffragette movement, that is an important moment in the human story. So I think it's important as educators that we really are committed to the cause of ensuring that young people have access, right, to resources that allow them to understand the beauty of the human experience so that they can be more informed citizens. When you think about Mrs. King and Dr. King's travels around the world, they're having to interact with people from different cultures, people who speak different languages. And it was important for them, and it remains important for us now, to be able to cultivate and raise young people who are able to have those kind of intercultural dialogues and be able to relate to people from other parts of the world and relate to people who have different ideas from them. It's all a part of how we move society forward, because certainly, as I mentioned earlier, the greatest question we can ask is, what do we owe our neighbor? And that's something that we can definitely learn quite powerfully from the example of Dr. King and Mrs. King.
Yeah, no doubt. I was just checking to see if we had any other questions. If you have a question, fire in. We'd love to hear it. Just thinking about anyone who might be with us for this event today, who might be feeling a little discouraged or concerned or wondering how they, as just one person, could make a difference. Based on your research of Mrs. King and so many conversations that you've had with the people closest to her in her life, what could you tell us about where she drew strength and inspiration from on hard days? We know there were many, many hard days. And what could we take from her to apply maybe when those hard days come for anyone who's joining us today as well?
Yeah, I think it's important to know that no one person is responsible for changing the entire world. You can't do it. And that's not even what Mrs. King and Dr. King, they didn't have it in their minds, that the weight of the entire world is on their shoulders. They were when you look at even how they started out with the Montgomery bus boycott, they were focused on what was right in front of them. Certainly they had a vision about what the world could be, but the weight of changing the entire world cannot be on one person's shoulders. And so, but what is our responsibility is that each of us has something to contribute to the creation of a better world. Right? So the responsibility to change the entire world is not on one person's shoulders, but what is on our shoulders is the responsibility to contribute something good and positive so that we can create a better world. And that's really all that Dr. King and Mrs. King set out to do in their lives, to make a contribution in the way that they saw best. Dr. King was, and I think this is important, Martin Luther King Jr. is not he wasn't out here looking for positions to be a leader of a civil rights movement. That he wasn't moving in that way. He actually was thrust into leadership. And during the Montgomery bus boycott, he's elected to the position, right, to lead what was then called the Montgomery Improvement Association. But he wasn't out here actively trying to say, well, let me go be a civil rights leader. He's thrust into leadership. So I think it's important for young people to be very clear on the fact that changing the entire world is not your responsibility, but making a positive and constructive contribution to the world is your responsibility. And I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's very well said. And you're talking about, we know Dr. King, Mrs. King now based on everything they went through, but it's so important what you're saying is remember that this was a group of young people just taking it day by day. And now we have the gift of kind of hindsight and seeing everything that happened. And as we have these groups, Students with King, I always think it's so powerful because especially if you're a high school student joining us today or in that college age group, that was the age group of the majority of these men and women. Like you said, even Dr. King and Mrs. King were so young at this time, even thinking about the late Congressman John Lewis, how young he was on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the civil rights movement is really run and energized by young people. You have organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which you mentioned, Congressman Lewis. So you have all of these movements and organizations that are literally energized by young people, and they're energized by people who have a vision about what the world can be and how they can kind of show up and make their contribution. So absolutely, even the Birmingham campaign, in some circles, it's one of the monikers of it is like, the children's movement, right? Because you have so many young people in Birmingham that are using their time to kind of advocate for changes in their local communities. Of course, as you mentioned, we have the gift of hindsight now where we can kind of say, and I think also in hindsight, sometimes we can feel like these things happened quickly when a lot of times these changes took time, right? The Montgomery bus boycott is a year-long process. So it's not something that just happened, within a month or even 2 months. These are things that take time. And I think it's important for young people to understand as well that change takes time. So you may not always see the results immediately, but if you can just remain committed to the process, that's also a very important characteristic and attribute as well.
Oh, that is such an important takeaway. I'm so glad you said that. I was just remembering, Dr. Graves, I had a chance to interview once at a King, with Students for King event, the personal accountant for the King family. And he was telling me this story about after Dr. King's assassination, Mrs. Coretta Scott King came to him and said, teach me everything. Teach me everything about the financial part of that. That's not where she had, been focusing her time, but she wanted to understand the big picture so that she could keep it moving. And I'd love some of your perspective on her as a woman who would lean into whatever she needed to lean into to do the work she felt compelled to do, even maybe if it was out of her comfort zone or not what she was used to doing. That really impacted me when I heard that story.
Absolutely. Now, I never knew Mrs. King personally, but fortunately, I'm able to work with people who did know Mrs. King personally and who worked with her on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things I think is important and that I've certainly learned about Mrs. King is that she wasn't afraid to ask questions and to ask good questions and to ask consistent questions. And I think that's an important value for young people to have. You won't always know everything, but what you must be comfortable with is asking questions. I tell my students all the time, there is no dumb question. The only thing that will bother me, right, as your teacher, professor, whatever, is if you don't ask me a question, because if you don't ask, I can't help to clarify. And that's how you learn. When you think about the Socratic method, Socrates, the great philosopher, his method of teaching was through asking questions, because when you ask questions, it helps you to think on a deeper level. And so Mrs. King, from what I've learned from those who worked with her, was that she did not have an issue asking questions, especially if it was something she needed to understand, because that was important to her leadership journey and process. I think it's dangerous and irresponsible if particularly those of us who are in leadership positions, if we just kind of lead and we don't ever stop to ask questions or to consider other perspectives. And so I think an important value that all of us can take from Mrs. King's life is how do we ask good questions so that we can get a deeper level of insight. And then also asking questions helps you to connect with people. Right. Whenever I meet one of the things I do, whenever I meet someone from another country in the world, I always say, how do you say hello in your language? How do you say thank you in your language? And this just those simple questions, right, could really help to foster deeper connection with people. I mean, we are all part of a human family. Dr. King called it the world house. We all live in this world house together. I mean, think about it. If I walk in my house and don't say something to my mom, she's gonna have a problem with that.
Yeah,
I can't just walk in the house and just walk. If she's sitting on the couch watching TV and I just walk by and don't say anything, she's gonna be like, "Why'd you walk in here and not say anything?"
My mom would be like, excuse me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, we all live in this world house together. And so the way that you get to know people and make connections is by asking good questions and being genuinely interested. I think one of the things I've also learned from Mrs. King is about how she was genuinely interested in people. I mean, she traveled all over the world. She traveled to Suriname at one point and was able to connect with the people in Suriname. And she talks about how being in Suriname actually reminded her about her childhood in Alabama. She traveled to South Africa. I mean, she traveled all over the world to really get to know people. So that was a long way to answer the question, but the moral of the story is asking questions is important because it allows you to connect with people on a deeper level.
I'm glad you took the long way, because I think it's true. It takes real courage to ask a question. And the accountant, I remember telling me, she said, I'm going to ask you to explain it, and I might ask you to explain it again. Yes. And I'm going to ask you as many times as it takes for me to really understand this so that I can continue to do the work. And I thought that is so good, because sometimes I'll ask the question once, but if I don't really get it, I certainly don't want to ask it twice, you know? Yes. But it's like getting outside of yourself to say, no, it's important that I understand this. And it's empowering to be able to say, I don't know, but if you do, and we come together, then together we can get something done. And I love that story. It always really stuck with me.
You know, one of the things in class when I'm teaching, I never say, this might be a tip for teachers, I never say, okay, y'all, do you have any questions? Because sometimes even framing it that way, students are like, oh my gosh, do I have any questions? I always say, what questions do you have? Because I know there are some. I was always the student who was, I'll use a word, inveterately curious. That's an SAT vocabulary word. Go look it up. I was inveterately curious as a young person. And so I was always kind of asking questions is natural to who I am. But even I think a tip for teachers, if you're struggling with how to get feedback from your students, I think it's important to frame it for them at the end of your lessons. Okay, what questions do you have? Right? So that you can kind of open up the space. But then I know this is not what you asked me, but there are also tools that we can use in the classroom that can help us elicit deeper and greater engagement from our students. There's a app that I use, or it's not an app, it's a software called Mentimeter, because sometimes in classrooms you have students that may be a little more timid than others. And so Mentimeter is a good way to kind of balance out the spectrum. So you have those students who have no issue raising their hands and asking questions, but then you have others who may be a little quieter. And Mentimeter is a polling software that allows students to ask their questions and then they show up on the screen and you can address them. So there are also different ways that we can kind of elicit responses. Not the question that you asked me, but I just wanted to share.
I'm glad. I didn't know that resource was available. I think that's great, because you have some extroverts, some introverts, and you want to reach everybody where they're at. I was going to say, I'm so happy that you've always had that curiosity, because that's what had you write the letter when you were 15. And it's the reason you can share all of this wonderful wisdom and insight and context with us today. And we appreciate it so much. So before we go, is there anything that I haven't asked that you feel like you'd want to share and leave with all of our students, teachers joining us from around the country and around the world today?
You know, you just said something about how I wrote that letter when I was 15 years old. And I think it's important for young people to still understand the significance of writing. I want to encourage all of the students and teachers out there. Please encourage your students to write letters to us at the King Center. We would love to receive them. In fact, some of my colleagues who worked with Mrs. King talk about, you know, there were people out from all over the world who would send letters to Mrs. King at the King Center, and she would read them. And I can guarantee you, if you send us a letter at the King Center, we will read it. Please send a letter to us. Send a letter to our CEO. Let her know how enthused and how excited you are about the programs that we're offering through the King Center. Perhaps, write to us about things you may like to see or may want to see. But we would love to have communication from students all over the world. So please send us letters. Our address is out there. Our email addresses are available, but we would love to be able to hear from you because that's important. You all are the people that we serve, and you are a part of the community that we are very intentional about reaching. And so please do write to us at the King Center and join our programs, participate in our programs. We have programs across a wide spectrum of content. We not only have programs for young people in the K-12 space, that's elementary, middle, or high school, but we also have programs for adults. So teachers, there are opportunities for you to get involved with what we're doing at the King Center. We have a fellows and interns program that's available. We have a variety of other educational initiatives, research initiatives. We have a faith-based initiative. So there's a variety of different ways to remain engaged with the King Center. So write to us, 2 action items, write for us and stay engaged with us.
I love that. And the website does a beautiful job. King Center's website does a beautiful job of laying out all the programs, the best way to get more information, be involved. So we encourage you to check out the website. And Dr. Kelisha Graves, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And your encouragement and your inspiration. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much. This was fun. Thank you.
And everybody who's with us today, we always want to do a better and better job serving you. So there's a QR code. There's a survey that you'll receive. Please fill out the survey. Let us know through this QR code right now. You can scan that. Let us know in the survey any questions that we could answer, any things you would suggest that we include in the program. Just your input is so helpful as we continue to serve people all over the world. Thanks, everybody, for your time. We hope you enjoyed the program today and look forward to seeing you again with Students with King. Have a good day.
Hi, I'm Dr. Bernice A. King.
And I'm Dr. Kimberly P. Johnson.
And we are the co-authors of
It Starts With Me. Well, it starts with me.
No, I think it really starts with me.
No.
Well, maybe it just starts with you.
It starts with you.
This is a book for children and the rest of the world about love. A powerful word that really can change and transform our world. Now, this girl here is Amora. So Amora is going to take us on a journey around the world with her friends, talking about how we can be loved.
Thank you so much for reading this book. It Starts With Me. Dr. King's vision is coming to life, and you guys are going to carry that vision into the world. Have fun reading.
We want our children and you parents to be loved in the way you speak, in the way you act, and in the way you think. That's what It Starts With Me about. It starts with me. I am the one who can fix the world with love.
It starts with me.
We join hands with people around the world who yearn for peace. We are tired of other people making decisions for us. We want to control what happens to us. We want to write our own history. We want to tell our own story because we feel that we know it better than anyone else.